Hello, and welcome to Lore Watch, roundtable freeform discussion about lore and our favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch. I've got my marvelous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How are you doing today, Matt?
I am doing amenably.
All right. Well, we're going to be answering more of your questions, our wonderful listeners out there. If you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those in. You can send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. You can also go ahead and send those questions to us on Discord. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open to everybody. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, you can also hit us up in the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, or on Patreon. We'll also look there. Where we tend to look for first is a way of saying thank you to our Patreon subscribers for helping us keep the lights on. With that in mind, there might be some mild spoilers here, maybe some major spoilers for The War Within. So if you are playing and making your way through the campaign still, you may want to come back a little bit later and see where we're at. We're going to start here with a question that Matt wanted to read first, or have us read first, which is, well, greetings, Lore Watchers. This might be spoilery for those that haven't had a chance to start the new expansion. See, spoilers right there. After watching the destruction of Dalaran and disintegration of Khadgar in a big magical explosion, my first thought was critical because it felt like they were just rehashing the same story beats of the destruction of Theramore. Big magical explosion, heroic mage holding it back while sending a female character through a portal. Death of a heroic mage. But after thinking about it more, I wondered if the feeling of what we've been through this before was intentional. We just had the Radiant Echoes event where we relived Azeroth's memories. Is this an extension of the Radiant Echoes? But rather than it being a literal replaying of actions, events in exactly the same way, it is instead an echo of events that imposed on new characters and places. So rather than reliving the destruction of Theramore and the death of Ronan, we are instead seeing that series of events echoing again, but overlaid in our present time with Dalaran and Khadgar. This is from Haluk from Saving the WoW. With that, Matthew, turn your head to the skies and, well, what do you think?
First off, I'm going to give you the non-spoilery response stuff. That there's three things to consider. The first is the idea of tropes and the repetition of themes. Sometimes a work of art or literature, in this case the story writing here, deliberately evokes the past in an attempt to recontextualize it or use it to provide context to the events that are currently ongoing. That's thing one to keep in mind. Thing two to keep in mind is the subversion effect, where you are given something that you think you recognize, and you go, this is repeating. And later on, you are made to realize your error. And this causes a story moment. The second aspect of that is the idea that you go into something thinking you know what's going to happen, and the story is deliberately subverting that. But it can also be that that's part of the text or the context or even the subtext of the work of art you're engaging in, because the character or characters are deliberately banking on other characters reacting as you have in saying, this is a repetition of this thing I've seen before. They too think, I have seen this before, and therefore act in a way that feeds into what the villainous character or the antagonist wants to have happen. Finally, I want to remind you that to a certain degree, the story of World of Warcraft has always been cyclical. So there is going to be some repetition just by its very nature. But in some cases, a good story can use that stylistic aspect of the medium it is engaged in, an MMO, to divert the story in a way you might not otherwise be able to do. That's the non-spoiler boilerplate I wanted to throw up before I then said spoilers from here. Khadgar ain't dead.
Mm-hmm.
You and Illyria both were intended to be deceived and therefore act in a way that was suitable for Xal'atath, who wanted the big alliance and horde army of angry people coming down to get revenge, which would then cause them to she could then use the Nerubians, who were afraid that they're going to get killed, as an army to attack Holofost for the sole purpose of her going right up to the big gem in the sky that currently was in shadow mode so she could draw all that shadowy power into her necklace thingy, which is the whole point of going to Dalaran in the first place, was just to get Dalaran in a position to start this whole combat off. And you were supposed to think, oh, it's just the same thing happening again, just like Ilaria spent most of this expansion acting like that's what it was. That was her plan from the start. And she and you and I, for about half of it, fell for it. And the only time I started getting suspicious was when I started looking at the Nerubian culture as it was being presented to us. And there's specifically a short that you get to see as you're following the campaign and you discover what happened to the previous Nerubian queen, which I'm not going to tell you here because while I have spoiled some, I'm not going to spoil everything. But when you see that clip, suddenly it recontextualizes the Nerubians.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't mindless monsters. These aren't void worshippers. These are people who are afraid and scared that their society is no longer progressing as they wanted it to and are looking for an explanation. And then suddenly angry people coming down from the sky. Like there's a lot more to it, but everything was very deliberately set up by Xalatath, and it hinges on you understanding the tropes, but not expecting the subversion of the tropes. Not that you didn't understand subversion of tropes, you just didn't see it coming. And it works. It's perfect, in fact. So that was Joe can now talk, but that's just how I wanted to answer this. Yeah,
there's more to add to it, I think, here as well, which is, okay, so we look at this, and Matt is absolutely correct in everything that he says here. The other thing to keep in mind is that it falls in line with a theme that you see repeated throughout all the questing that you do as you're leveling. In particular, you hit on something that I think is very important, the radiant echoes and the memories. Those are your memories, your experiences are a very important theme for each of the zones, right? So when you first start and you're introduced to the Earthen, their entire story revolves around memory. Some of it is them having faulty memory and starting to lose their memories because they were never intended to function this long. And this is an air quote. There's more to it than that, obviously, but that's a whole separate storyline to go down. But also holding on to the memory of their creators and their oaths and keeping to them and what that means, whether that is beneficial or detrimental to them, all of that is there, right? Like that's the whole theme of their zone and storyline. And even when you create an Earthen and you go through the miniature Earthen creation event, which is not as robust as some of the others, but still has some little tiny bits that feed into this, it's about memories, or in particular, in this case, talks about dreaming, because this is something other Earthen know about, kinda, but not really, and new ones being born are filled with this radiant world song. In fact, it's one of their racials that has them dream, that this is part of their being now. They dream as Azeroth dreams. Hallowfall is all about the memory of an empire and a people sort of stranded in beneath the earth, not able to get where they need to go, and not able to return to where they want to be. So they're sort of stuck there, and they have these traditions. They keep the traditions going. They have sort of like this regimented existence, and then you have people start to break away from it. There's a whole quest line about one of the guys who's essentially like a paladin, right? And he's been down here so long doing grisly work and dealing with so much tragedy that he just can't anymore. And it's the weight of those experiences that you as the adventurer have to deal with and help him sort of process and go through. And I'm not talking about Anduin. I'm literally talking about one of the Arathi. And it was a very touching, very meaningful quest line where it's like, at the end of it, you tell the man, go fishing. Like, take a day off. You don't have to be all about this. Like, you're not dishonoring the memory of those you served with, or the people that you went to battle with, or that, maybe no longer that laid down arms to save others and
If you
gave their
never,
life.
yeah, if you never take any time to live,
It
you
wasn't
might as well
worth
be
it.
dead.
Exactly.
And
Right.
if you're dead, you can't help your people. You can't help your people by taking yourself to a whetstone until there's no more you left.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need a mindless weapon. If they can make a sword in a forge somewhere. They need somebody who knows how to, not only how to fight, but why to fight and what they're fighting about. If you're just nothing inside, you will not be able to do that. It's something else that is maintained in this game, and it's maintained even when you finally get down to Ankahet, because you get to see that from the point of view of both other people and of the Nerubians.
Mm-hmm.
The Nerubians, I really think it is one of the best things they've done to make Nerubians people. They are people. They don't like surfacers, or what do they call them? Overcrawlers?
I think overcrawlers, yeah.
Yeah. They don't like them, but they are still people, and they're willing to work with them if it serves the purposes they want to serve. They're not mindless, and they're not fanatics.
Yeah, and then they're not fanatics, they're not mindless, they're not purely servants, but we started to see shades of that too echoed. And again, here is a parallel, right? It's an echo to the Mantid. You see a lot of this with the Mantid. They're not mindless. In fact, you work with them and when you're going through Mists of Pandaria, which again, I don't think the fact that we went through WoW Remix and we did it in Pandaria before this expansion was an accident. I think this was 1,000% intentional because of the story parallels there, right? But like the Mantid are a complete race. They have this identity. They have their own wants and needs, and until they get into a position where like they start following or are under the sway of a very heavy power, I guess that'd be the best way to put it. They were our allies up until that moment. And the same thing is happening here. And again, Matt brought up fear, and I want to point out fear was a big theme in Pandaria as well. And the Mantid, when you go into the heart of fear, it's their castle. It is the Mantid, like royalty lives there at the heart of fear, because fear is something that controls them. And what is happening on Kahet with all of our lovely little bug friends, it's fear. It's propaganda. Like if you do the questing in the zone 2 and you go through the actual city around the instance where the instances take place, before you go into them, you'll start to hear that. You'll see the orators, you'll see the projectors, you'll hear the idea of ascension in order to protect yourself and those around you, to serve the empire, to have a better future for tomorrow. It's all fear-mongering to control a populace, because if they weren't being controlled or not under that thumb, they wouldn't follow anything for Xal'atath. As a matter of fact, they don't think they're following Xal'atath. They think they're following the daughter of the queen who tragically died, which that's a whole other thing as well. That's a sub-story that's going on with that. And that right there is also the dynamic between the queen and her daughter, or the old queen and the current queen at this point, is about that memory and tradition and what it means to be that people. And you also see it with the Heronir. The Heronir have their whole storyline so far, and there hasn't been a whole lot yet. There will be more. I am absolutely confident of this fact. But the Heronir have like these deep traditions and memories of this place, but they also like know about why things are the way they are. Like I mentioned last week, and I'm pretty sure it's all but confirmed that the roots that we see beneath the world in Ankahet and other places, like leading up to Halithal, are the roots of the first world tree. I believe there's a book that proves that. I can't find it though. But I was talking with Phil from our website about it in our guild chat, and he seems to believe that it was confirmed somewhere, and I have to dig for it. But they know why that happened. They know the why of it. They're sort of like the keepers of that memory, but they can't keep it to themselves. But those things sort of influence how they interact with stuff, including dealing with the Black Blood. There's the fear of tradition versus going outside of that tradition, even amongst themselves, or dealing with overcrawlers or outsiders. The idea of like trying to smooth out the tensions between them and the Arathi, things like that. Like, all of this has to do with that, what you're saying, that theme of like memory. Like, as far as they know, the Arathi have always been like this militant race. That's the memory that they hold. And as far as the Haranir are concerned with the Arathi, or the Arathi are concerned with the Haranir, they don't know them. They have no idea who or what they are because they live in the shadows, and they've been fighting a shadow war for ages, both in their own zone and against the walls, trying to keep back all of the man. I can't talk today. I apologize. But all of the bugs, right? Like they're trying to stem that tide. It's a very, very, well done thematic throughput. And to Matt's point with that spoiler, that Khadgar isn't dead, it was one of those moments too where it did get a visceral reaction out of me immediately. And then the more I thought about it and the more I looked at it, I started saying, wait a minute, hold on a second. That thing doesn't destroy what it grabs. It absorbs it. It sucks it inside of it. So Khadgar is probably just inside of it. Everybody she's consumed is probably just inside of it. And that's what happens. We break it and out pops Dadgar. I think in guild chat, when I have in that moment, like, I think I had an expletive that I said, and then immediately said Dadgar right after it. Like, because it was just proof of that, something that had been like sitting and nagging at the back of my mind for the entire time doing it.
It also fills a thematic need that is set up throughout this thing of Anduin's story about, what is your role to the light? What is your role in the world? He can't, and he even says at one point, I can't be my father. He's been trying to be his father for years now, and that's not working because he's not. And his father knew it, and that's why he told him in his letter, no, what you need to do is fight for peace, because that's the way Anduin always was. It's not the way Varian was. Mm-hmm. Varian knew that his way of doing things wasn't going to work. It's really, again, I'm trying not to spoil some in certain parts of this whole story because I want you to get to see them. But you did ask, and unfortunately for you, I have the answer. So yeah, there's a lot to this, and we've only seen we only get to see the end of the first campaign part. We
have just hit the end of Act 1, right? Like the stuff before this was the prologue. We just got through Act 1, and there's so much more to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's side stuff too. Like, I mean, when you do the campaign, when you get to the end of the campaign, unless you're the kind of person who does absolutely every quest in his own before you do the campaign stuff, which you're still doing that then, because there's a ton, then you will have another 30 to 40 hours of gameplay now that you can explore at your leisure. That will fill in side gaps and give you pieces you hadn't gotten yet.
And I said this before, and I'll say it again. This is absolutely an experience where I recommend you do everything, including the side quests. Mm-hmm. And I do this myself every expansion because that's where a lot of the story bits are. But this is so particularly well done of an experience. Like, I'm over the moon with it. I am on my third playthrough, my third leveling experience with my characters, going through and redoing some of these quests. This is, I don't do that. Like, I generally don't do that often. But it is really good. And it's really interesting to see how everything is interwoven together. All the parallels, all the bright spots and the dark spots. And yeah, it just floored with it. So highly recommended that you spend some time and do all the zone quests, all the main quests, obviously, for the campaign, but sit and do every side quest, including all the ones in Ahn'kahet, because those are eye-opening.
Yeah. If you want to understand the Nerubians as a people, those side quests are really worth doing. Not in the Haranir for what's going to come, but for the Nerubians as a class, as a group of people, yeah, absolutely. It is 100% worth it.
Yeah.
One of the things they do here that I think is really interesting, as somebody who's played for a long time and has done a lot of alts over the years, there's a few places where you get to decide something, and that decision has small but permanent consequences. Like, there's a quest in Hallowfall where you decide who gets to be the next skyship captain. And honestly, I made the wrong choice, in my opinion. Not that there is really a right or a wrong choice, but I ended up, the person that was unjustly, attacked by her co-student is basically, there's no justice for her. She doesn't get to be the sky captain, even though the only reason she turned in her report late is because of something that the other person did. She, the other person doesn't profit. They don't get to be sky captain either. But why should she be punished for what he did? And I was trying to be impartial. Then I realized, no, wait, this sucks. But by then it was too late. And that's a permanent consequence of me not thinking. And I wanted to point out that the story here is definitely working on multiple levels to give you the idea that, what you do does matter. And these things that happen that look familiar, you need to engage with them and not just say, oh, they're just doing that again. No, because they're not just doing that again. You need to engage with it. That's just something I wanted to point out when we're talking about this story.
That is something that I think is absolutely worth pointing out as well. So thank you very much for that, Matt. Hopefully that answers your question. Again, we could talk about this for probably an entire episode, but I think for right now, we're going to move on. Our next question comes from Yojimbo, a balanced druid on Proudmoore, which makes a whole lot of sense with the root of this question. Which, by the way, I absolutely love because I get to talk about some weird, obscure lore. Can you explain all we know about the origins of the balance spec? It's a little bit broad, but this also brings up one of my favorite points of trivia, which is, do you know where Moonkin came from? I think Matt does, because it ties in with something else that I know he enjoys quite a bit.
Yeah, I know the whole Winter Spring deal, yep.
Not just Winter Spring. I'm talking about the character design itself.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Moonkin exists because of Godzilla. And this may sound like an odd path, but I want to tell the story because I think it is absolutely fascinating. So, obviously, Godzilla was created by Tomoyuki Tanaka in the 50s, which was like this large, commentary on nuclear war and everything else, which is right in the aftermath of World War II. Makes a lot of sense. This is why it's a gigantic dinosaur monster that has radiation powers. Okay. Move forward a few years, actually several years, where Gary Gygax is walking through basically a five and dime and sees a bag full of plastic, like just dinosaur toys. And he grabs it. And what does he wind up doing with this? These wind up becoming the basis of a lot of creatures that he would then put into the monster manual or monster specs for Dungeons and Dragons. One of them happens to be a Godzilla analog that was then covered in fur and given a beak. You may know it as an owlbear. This was the first conceptualization of an owlbear, which then went on to inspire an entire generation of young people who played this game, and those that were art inclined sort of picked up on those cues. Enter Samwise, one of the conceptual artists and chief artists that has shaped how Warcraft has looked for the entirety of its career. So he had a bunch of concept sketches of these Moonkin, these owl bear-like creatures. And in Warcraft 3, our introduction to them was as Wildkin. They didn't look anything like Moonkin at the time, possibly due to the limitations of the game engine at the time, or what they were able to do inside of the game engine. But when World of Warcraft released, we got our full actualization of Boomkins, of our balanced druids, of our Moonkin form. And if you look in the game files of the game itself, they are not called Wildkin. They are not called balanced druids or Moonkin. They're called owlbears. Their file in game is legitimately called owlbear. And I absolutely love it that the reason we have balanced druids at all, because Moonkin exists at all, is because Godzilla was created in 1954. I will let Matt now talk about the origins in-game if he wants to, and we'll go from there. So, Matt.
Basically, yeah, in the world of Warcraft, the actual setting of Azeroth, balanced druids exist because Elun's favorite creatures to act as messengers to the night elves were Moonkin, who were not Wildkin, Moonkin, because there are Wildkin as well. Still, if you go in the original, if you play WoW Classic, you can still go and see this. The original Night Elf starting zones had Wildkin in them, who are basically big owl bear things, waddling around, doing that kind of stuff, but they're almost completely mindless. They're feral. Moonkin are in a similar situation, but they still have the blessing of Tyrande on them. And it's not Tyrande, sorry, Elune. Wow, I got those two confused. That's bad. I'm gonna get it. When Elune created them, she created them to act as messengers, to go to night elves and speak with her authority or hoot with her authority, because I don't know if they were ever actually verbal. It's never really been said that I can recall, but at that time they were recognized by night elves. Oh, hey, yeah, these things are blessed by Elune. And so when they showed up, they would be considered like an omen. Like if Elune has sent the Moonkin to us, there's something she thinks we need to do or something she thinks we need to know about. And so the druids studied them and their connection to nature. And it's because one of the things people often forget is that druids are still connected to Elune. Like there's like the spells of like Wrath and Moonfire, and the entire balance spec is all about balancing nature's aspects, including the arcane, and that's part of Elune. It's even possibly even related to Elune and Aenar, because Aenar as a Titan is inherently arcane powered.
Well, and don't forget the Legion artifact was the Scythe of Elune.
Yes, it wasn't the Scythe of Aenar. And for that matter, the other thing, the Pillar of Creation was the Tear of Elune, not Aenar. So there was a relationship between the two, and the Moonkin kind of embody that balance between nature and the arcane, that balance between creative forces, because both of the arcane and natural energies are creative forces by their very, and I'm sorry, but that's the right word here, nature. They are both about creation. They are both about, in a way, life. So they tie into that force as well. And that's kind of the underpinning that we're getting when we're talking about balanced druid. But we don't know specifically why Moonkin exist. Like, we don't know how do they work as messengers if they can't talk to the people they're spreading messages for. It's kind of like if you play Final Fantasy 13 and you're like, they have a quest for you, the Lassie do, and if you don't do it, they destroy you. And it's like, okay, how do I find out? They give you hazy visions. What? I don't even know what I'm supposed to do, and you're going to kill me if I don't do it? So it's kind of like that without the killing. Like, Elune wants you to do something. She sends a gigantic bear chicken at you, and you're like, okay, Mr. Bear Chicken, what do you want me to do? And like, he might probably hoots, and you're like, oh, you're an owl bear, not a chicken bear. Okay, gotcha. I still don't know what you want, but okay, guys, we got to figure out what he wants. He's here. He's from Elune. He's not leaving until we figure it out. So there's a quest line in Winterspring that kind of brings this all out as you go through it. You find out that the Moonkin were special to Elune. You find out that the druids revere them. And you find out that they are kind of like embodied balance between forces and the balance spec. There's a reason you turn into a Moonkin when you are balance spec, because you are literally using the Moonkin form to do what the Moonkin is best at, which is balancing these forces, hence Balanced Druid. So that's in the game, but it very clearly does not answer every question we're going to have. I, at some point, would like to see more. Quite frankly, I'd like to hear more about the Moonkin and what's going on there. I don't know if this expansion is going to be that expansion, but I think at some point we're going to see Elune again, possibly during Midnight, because Elune, one of Elune's forms is very much the Night Warrior. And Midnight feels like right now, if you go back to the Night Elf starting zones, the moon is still this giant black thing in the sky, and there is no sun. It's a permanent eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like Midnight could be the expansion for Elune. However, that's what we got right now.
The one thing I also want to add to the context here as well with the Wildkin, because this is something that I think is interesting. I don't know if it is currently true, because I have not looked at the Moonkin models outside of player models in a while. But one of the things that used to be tied with their story was the golden eyes, which we know in elf society was revered as a sign of like great importance. That this is partially going with what Matt said about them being bearers of omen. But all Owlkin had golden eyes at one point. I don't know if they still do. but that was a big like thing with them, and that's one of the reasons why the night elves looked at them and said, okay, you are very important, or the elves in general just looked at them and said, you are very important, you have golden eyes. You know, maybe it's because that's what our queen has, or, you know, warriors of legend or whatever have told us that golden eyes mean something. You are part of something important. You are part of prophecy, essentially. And then all these creatures tend to have it. Of course, they're going to make the correlation that they're favored by the moon goddess. They see them worshiping at holy sites like Owlwing Thicket. They see them dancing at night. They see them, I believe at one point they used to make pilgrimages to the Well of Eternity, like, you know, or the edges of the waters and stuff like that, if I remember correctly. There's a ton of like just random little things that Moonkin are tied up in. And it's
I just
really
like the fact that you said bearers of.
Yes, you're welcome.
And I heard it as bears of. You are obviously bears of importance. Sorry, but I couldn't let this go.
Oh no, it is appropriate, especially when we're talking about basically owl bears. But yeah, there's more to them than I think we fully explored. And Matt is right that it is part of you being in perfect harmony, you being in that state of balance as a druid is what essentially allows you to take on that form. It's what allows you to call on the sun and the moon in equal measure, which that's probably going to be important later. Just throwing that out there. But and as well as having access to that arcane power as well, because there are things that you do that have that arcane power, and as well as just being a gigantic form that you can go and do a ton of important things with, because unlike other druid forms, you can whack things with a stick if you need to too. Like the other forms don't generally get to use their weapons unless it's restoration, because they don't generally take on an animal form. But feral druids and guardian druids, the weapons become a part of them. They just transform fully into animals. Moonkin, not so much. You ever seen a moonkin with a scythe? I have. It's scary. But hopefully that answers your question. Matt, is there anything else you want to add about our moonkin friends?
You know, it's a bear with an owl head. It's like two gigantic monsters that kill you for the price of one. Take it easy. Be careful.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to our next question here, and this one comes from Razorbug. Question for Lore Watch. Sir Finley Murgleton seems he will be important in this expansion, but asking as a Brit, who knighted him? Are there other similarly honored murlocs? I don't know if we know who knighted him, do we?
I know very little about the Hearthstone characters that they've brought in, so I don't know. It could be as simple as, you know, there's quite a few crowned heads of state in Azeroth. It could have been any of them. Theoretically, Tyrande could do it. So I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe also I believe knights can knight people. Like that's something at least in real history, a knight could at least, you know, temporarily knight somebody, and you know, definitely a knight. If the actual royalty wasn't around, it would usually be a knight who presented them with their weapon and did the whole shoulder touchy thing. So who knows? It's a fictional setting, so there could be lots of things going on here.
Yeah, and I don't think that
I know.
I was gonna say I don't think they've actually pointed it out in game either. So like I know that in Hearthstone, the whole like backstory is that his egg was found by Elise Starseeker, and then like essentially like hatched the egg and raised him as her own. And then he joined the League of Explorers and then eventually earned a knighthood. That's all we know really about that particular thing. Although I do think it is funny that if you go into the last expansion, when you did the alternate timeline stuff, when you're on as Murloth, he's one of the folks that is sitting there fighting Deathwing Urgle, which I think is absolutely hilarious, but he's everywhere. Like he's just part of the Explorers League, and he is pretty much everywhere. And you see him. The reason that people bring this up too, and are kind of curious why he's there, is because when you go into delves, especially the early delves, and I don't know if it's a random event or if it's every delve because I haven't seen him in every delve, but they're there. Like him and what's the person he's with? I can't remember. Reno Jackson. Him and Reno Jackson are there doing their exploration. and you have to beat them up, and then you get something out of it, and then they disappear into the aether. But he's been at Mechagon, he's been in Stormheim, he's been at the Shimmering Expanse, he's been in Uldum, he was in Tierhold. Like, you can easily miss him, but he went to Tierhold, the Tierhold Reservoir. He's chilling around there doing his exploration. So he's seen some stuff, and he gets around. So
yeah, this is like the first time that they've actually really informed us, like up front. Like when you go to Dalaran, then they're like, you should go talk to those guys. But they've been around before.
Yeah, and he's not the only important one that we have seen at other places. Like Morgul the Oracle is a Murloc who happens to appear in the heart of Azeroth, the Shaman Order Hall. But he also appears in Deliverance Point on the Broken Shore, who, again, from Hearthstone. He was a Hearthstone as a shaman hero before being introduced into Warcraft. But he's important enough and a wielder of the spirits large enough that he shows up in the Shaman Order Hall and has some pretty important stuff that deals there that he has to deal with. And it's very interesting to see Murlocs, like Nerubians, have a much more complicated society than we anticipate. And they're not just mindless, wild entities. They actually have like intelligence and personality.
Yeah, for all we know, he was crowned by his own. He was knighted by his own people. Maybe they have their own knight situation. Not really something we can talk about because we haven't seen much of their culture. We know that at one point we've seen the Naga enslaving them, and there's a whole bit where you can go and save them. So who knows? Maybe there was even a resistance to the Naga. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, there was. This is on the coast of Azeroth, of the Eastern Kingdoms, actually. You know the one I'm talking about, right? It's kind of in the burning step, not the burning steps. Oh bloody heck, the one that isn't the burning steps, the Badlands. I want to say not the Badlands, the one where Netherguard Keep is.
Oh,
it's south of Netherguard Keep. You run into these Murlocs. Their kids are being stolen and they're being enslaved, and you go and you beat up a bunch of Naga until that stops. I can never remember the name of the zone. It's the one where
Blasted Lands.
Yeah, Blasted Lands. Thank you. I can never remember the name.
Yeah, but hopefully that answers some of your question. It is currently a completely unanswerable question, ripe for speculation. Maybe there is just some Murloc monarch there in some underground or underwater cave or whatever, sitting on a throne of pearls or whatever, that decided to knight Sir Finley. But either way, he will probably be important later on, in so much as uncovering secrets always seems to involve him being around, especially as of late. But we're going to move on to our next question. This one comes from Stouts, formerly known as Stouty Poofs. And this ties in with our first question a little bit. Spoilers. Dalaran blows up, and as I was playing through the story, I couldn't help but notice some notable Dalaran residents missing in Vareesa, Windrunner, and her children. Am I missing something? Wouldn't her big sister Illyria be a little bit worried about them? Nothing, not a word. Hold on, we'll get there. I want to finish the question. I feel as though this was a big miss that could have really played out in Illyrria's fears of losing her family, and yes, I'm a Windrunner stalker. Well, continuing the campaign and doing the campaign and dealing with Illyria, you learn, and I'll stop and let Matt go. You learn what, Matt?
One of the first questions you can ask her is, what's up with your sister? And she's like, she wasn't there. She's moved to somewhere else to raise her children. I was really grateful that she wasn't there. You almost get the feeling that her not being there was kind of one of Illyria's conditions for doing something for Khadgar. It's like, yeah, you get my sister out of this city. I don't trust you guys. You keep doing stuff. But regardless, yeah, she's not there. When the city goes up, she is not there. She is back somewhere on the Eastern Kingdoms or Kalimdor, where she is raising her kids and minding her own business.
Well, her kids are grown enough, I think, that they're not necessarily 100% under her thumb anymore. But there is
but they're like teenagers, man.
They are.
Keep in mind that they are, as half elves, they do age more slowly than humans do. And they were like babies when Ronan died, and Ronan only died like a decade ago at most. So yeah, they're still kids. They're just not. They're not like infants. They're probably very, very willful children. That I'm expecting a bunch of young adult books now. The Adventures of Vareesa Windrunner and her unruly children, And I would love it if Uncle Arator was there every so often going, was I like this? Was I like this? Do you remember if I was like this? Arator, you were on another planet. I never even got to see you. You were probably not like this because your father is that guy. But regardless, yeah.
No. I'm not saying that they're grown adults and they don't need her supervision, because we know that from Shadowlands that is not the case, because one of the things that happened before that was essentially Vareesa and Illyria going to meet with her at Windrunner's Spire. They knew about it. Her kids knew about it and expressed interest in going and being together as a family. But then Galadin started arguing with Giramar about Sylvanas just being evil, and now leading the people that killed their father. And then there's this big family argument that happened once in back and forth, and then they moved past it. But I think that's interesting, or the thing that people often forget, is that Vareesa is not just a resident of Dalaran. She's the Ranger General of the Silver Covenant.
Oh, yeah.
Like, she is an important person. She has a life of things that she needs to take care of.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I didn't mean to survive. She's just.
I'm not saying that for you. I'm not saying that for you. I'm saying that for everybody else, though. Like, I don't know why this gets glossed over so much. And it's something that I think the game could do a better job of highlighting, that, again, she is the Ranger General of the Silver Covenant, which is their version of the Ranger General of Silver Moon. In the Silver Covenant is an important faction that, yes, they were based out of Dalaran at one point.
Silver Moon, they actually have a presence in Silver Moon now, don't they?
They absolutely do. Yeah, and they're the essentially the alliance equivalent of the Sun Reavers for the Horde. They essentially do the same thing. They did exist. They have the enclaves in Dalaran, but they're all the way through the world. Like, the base of operations for the Silver Covenant is Winterguard Keep and the Windrunner's Overlook. Like, those are their headquarters. So their headquarters aren't even Dalaran. It's just a theater of operation for them. And if I remember correctly, it was only a theater of operation for them because of the going after the Lich King and Wrath of the Lich King, where they needed to bring both, essentially the High Elves and the Blood Elves together to go after this threat. We saw how that worked out later, but that's a whole other thing. So we don't know where she is in the world, but she's not here, and that makes perfect sense. And also, she wouldn't leave her kids behind. She would take them with her. They do need that supervision, but also, after losing her husband...
Yeah, this is definitely not something she wants to be just, blasé about.
Yeah. There's no way in Elun's light or all things of creation that she would let those kids out of her sight for very long. Which also coincides with, like, you can say the same thing about Illyria, but her kid's a fully capable adult, right? Like, he is a powerful paladin in his own right, a powerful warrior who's capable of taking care of himself, and she doesn't have to worry about him. Well,
for one thing, she spent 1,000 years away from him, not by her choice, neither.
Yep, not by choice.
So it's. I don't think he lived 1,000 years in that time, but he did grow to adulthood. He had to. He had to do it without her around, without his father around either.
Yeah. Yeah, the Windrunners are a complicated people, and mark my words, we have definitely not heard the last of any of them, and I have a feeling that maybe not now, but probably in Midnight, we're going to see maybe the culmination of Illyria's story, because even though we're going after Xal'atath here, I think that the echoes and reverberations will be felt into the next expansion, and I think that will be sort of the culmination of that story.
Also, I don't know that we're not going to see Xal'atath in the next expansion. That's not necessarily the case that this is her end.
Just going to say that. Xal'atath is an unknowable being of very immense power. There is nothing to say that we are actually going to defeat her or kill her. As a matter of fact, again, spoilers here, when you confront her in the Priory of... I can't remember what the name of it is. Like, I'll just call it the Priory. When you confront her in the Priory and she's trying to soak in all that magic... Illyria doesn't shoot her. She knows she can't hurt her. She shoots the relic because that will disrupt her and cause her to go away or disrupt her plans because she doesn't know how to deal with her quite yet. But again, when we get to her, There's nothing that says we're going to kill her, and she'll probably be tied up in Midnight. For all we know, we'll get to the end of this expansion, and nothing will be resolved. It will just be the climax leading directly into Midnight. But I don't think that we've seen the last of the Windrunner sisters, including Sylvanas. And I would not be terribly surprised, and as much as people I know are sort of done with Sylvanas, but I wouldn't be surprised if in Alaria's darkest moment, Sylvanas repents for some of her past sins with her and is allowed to help, because it is an allowed thing, because she's currently trapped where she is. But also having Vareesa and help her sister as well, having all 3 Windrunners for one united purpose one last time would be a great way to sort of end their little story arc. Maybe not, oh, everything is rosy and hunky-dory. Don't forget, like, at one point, Sylvanas wanted to kill Vareesa so that she could be together with her. But an acknowledgement of we're still there for each other. We all have our own things to do and deal with. But when the chips are down and we're at our darkest moment, we'll be there for each other. That would be my pie in the sky thing, but we'll see. Either way, Midnight's where I think that's going to happen.
It does seem at least possible. With the new City of All Elves thing going on and the Dragon Isles, I think there is a certain possibility that there's a union of that group.
Well, especially because, and not to get totally off topic, but y'all love that, right? With the Dark Ranger discussion and all of those Dark Rangers being welcomed into Belemeth, and at least to some degree, even with that trepidation, but having a home again, quelling their anger, like having their sort of resentment washed away, because that's what's happening, right? A lot of the things that they're holding on to, a lot of the things that they were led to believe are no longer there. They're with their people again in a different capacity. And elves were always long-lived. They were always nigh immortal. So what's the difference? They're also nigh immortal. So there's threads there that they can pull on later if they want to. And even though the elves got their end story, and I'm air quoting that very heavily, at the end of Dragonflight, it's not fully resolved yet. Belemeth is just starting.
I don't think we want it to be. I mean, That's the whole point of this kind of storytelling, is it doesn't really just end. You don't want it to. You want to keep going. You want to see what happens next. I feel like that's sort of the premise here. It's just that they've set up the stage for something else to happen next.
Agreed. All right. I think we have time for one last question, and this one is a Diablo-themed question, which comes from Skafir. I hope I pronounced that right. You gave a pronunciation, so Skafir. As I was reading through the notes on the most recent campfire chat, I noticed something interesting. One of the new mythic uniques grants additional damage to angels and demons. Would love to know your thoughts on when and in what context we could be fighting angels in the next expansion. Tinfoil hats encouraged. Matt?
Do you mean by the next expansion if you mean during the one? Fall? In that one, I don't think it's going to be. It might be the one after it. But the current one, Vessel of Hatred, I don't think we're going to be fighting. We might fight corrupted angels, but I don't think we're going to fight regular angels.
I don't know. I'm on the fence with that one.
I am too, just because we're going to. Well, the thing, that's why I said we might be fighting corrupt ones, because we are going to Travancal, and we are going to see the remains of the Zaka room, like what they turned into with Mephisto at the helm. So I don't know. There might be some angels in cages who've gone crazy. There's a lot of possibilities, but I don't know. We saw Izual's fall in Diablo 2,
mm-hmm.
and we know that the whole deal with Inarius being tortured by Mephisto for a very, very long time is something that we saw the outcome of in Diablo 2. That's the whole deal with Izual was around that idea. So it could be, it could very well be, we'll see some angels hopped up on angry juice. And that's the other thing, too, though, to think about. The angels killed a lot of people
mm-hmm.
in Diablo 3. It's quite possible that we'll fight them not because they come to fight us, but because some group on Azeroth is really mad at them.
Yeah, there's a possibility for that. And that's one of the things that I think is possibly interesting as far as the next expansion goes, or the expansion goes, the Vessel of Hatred, is there could be many reasons we interact with angels. Angels are not in a good place. They were not in a good place at the end of Diablo 3. Their homeland had been completely wrecked. They were in disarray. Many of them had been destroyed. Angels are still not in a good place. One of the main storylines from the Diablo 4 campaign is that Inarius is mad because he didn't get called home. Like, they never came for him. And he's just stuck here on the mortal plane. Why is he stuck there? I don't want to be stuck here anymore. What's going on with this? And like that resentment of heaven being closed, because heaven is closed, is possibly a thing that they would pull on. And the reason I say that is because Inarius might not be the only one that's locked out of heaven. He might not be the only one that can't go back home. And
actually, you know what you're making me think about?
Go ahead.
Forget for a moment that he might not be the only one locked out of heaven. What about all the angels that might be locked into heaven?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Tyrael had to go, and he told them, yeah, I gotta go. Hopefully I'll be back. And then that's the last time we heard from the dude. Where is Tyrael again? Does anybody know? Does anyone seen him, talk to him, anything? You know, it's probably not a little thing that Elias decided to contact Lilith after, you know? Like, Tyrael was gone. The only angelic figure around was Inarius, and he was not doing well sanity-wise. I think there is possibilities here for like what's going on in heaven. What's going on with, you know, Imperius, who was already kind of didn't like us very much. So yeah, there's some stuff here to consider.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing too, is we've gotten the demon story right now. We've gotten to sort of that demonic overlay, right? Like the vessel of hatred is going to be more of that. However, that doesn't mean that angels aren't going to be involved. And it could be what's happened with, you know, Tyrael. It could be more of what happened with Inarius, because Inarius, we don't know that he's gone. We know that he got absorbed. Is he dead? Who knows? Is he a demon? Who knows? They could pull on a lot of those different threads. We also know that the angels as beings are more concept than physical form. We knew that when the Crystal Arch was working, if they would die or whatever the case was, their essence would go back to the Crystal Arch. They would be reborn, maybe as the same aspect, maybe as a different aspect, definitely not the same angel. They would essentially cease to exist, with some of them sort of bucking that. But we don't know, again, we don't know if all of them went back. We don't know who was left on the mortal plane. We also don't know if any were not called back because they were left behind for specific purposes. Angels have had a history of being sent to guard specific things.
Ooh, dude.
Go for it. You know where I'm going with this?
I don't think I know where you're going with this, but maybe. There was an artifact you saw quite a few times in Diablo 4 called the Sightless Eye.
Yep.
Which was important to the people of Skovos because, you know, it was the basis of their entire culture and the means by which the Nephilim that ruled them could contact the angel that they were sleeping with. And then one day that angel stopped responding. Now, we don't know why that angel stopped responding. We don't know who that angel was. We know the name, but the name doesn't really mean anything. Were they an archangel? Were they just an angel? What's up with this? However, one thing we absolutely do know is that somebody later after that, some angelic form or being that Deckard Cain suspected was actually a recreation or a reflection of the Uldyssian Uldiomed, the son of, the Nephilim that started the whole Sin War. But what if it wasn't? What if it was in fact some other angel attempting to reach their lover via the Sightless Eye and driving some poor monk crazy? And he starts a whole religion about it because he didn't know what's going on. That's just one of possibility for like angels who might be around still. But that's just something that popped into my head.
Yeah, I mean, and you hit the nail on the head because we grab the Sightless Eye, right? Like in the campaign, or is it not? Yeah, it is a Sightless Eye that we got.
Yeah, no, we grabbed the Sightless Eye. It's straight up the Sightless Eye. I forget. Like somebody says it. I think it was actually my God, what can't I remember his name? Thank you. It was Lorath. Mm-hmm. Lorath is like, the Sightless Eye, grab it. We can't let an artifact like that stay here. So Elias got the Sightless Eye from somebody. Possibly he went to Skovos to get it. We know that the Sightless Eye had been stolen, and in fact, the entire Rogue Sisterhood originally started as people who had stolen the Sightless Eye. And we're looking, the Amazon from Diablo 2 is looking for it because it's sacred on Scovos. So there's a lot of potential for like Diablo stuff to involve that thing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of potential for that Diablo stuff to involve the angels who, if they're coming back and they're also looking for a way to scry and locate certain prying evils that are out there in the world, that could be one of them, right? That could be something that they're keenly interested in.
Or if you had an angel that wanted to, go back home, that's not a bad way to figure out how to get back home. How do we get back home? Show me a way to get back home. At least I could show you. It can show you pretty much anything. That's what it does. So yeah, there's lots of possibilities here.
Yeah. So I don't know that there will be a major theme in the next, in the current expansion that's releasing in the Vessel of Hatred, but I would not be surprised if we see a presence or something harken back to them, especially because, again, it's been this question. The mortals have been dealing with this for so long. There's a reason Inarius was able to get as much of a follower base that he did. The angel, he was the only angel, right? He was the only one there that was giving them any sort of attention. It was easy to join his cause because there were no other angelic forces stepping forward, and now he's gone. His followers are not. In fact, the one high priestess is still alive. The one that was his essentially voice, his confidant, his general of his armies, the one that led them there first and foremost. She's still there. She had a lot of time to learn how to talk to angels. Who knows if she won't be trying to make contact in a zealous way.
And she might be looking for the Sightless Eye for exactly that reason. Keep in mind, we had to steal it from her.
Yes, we did.
She had it. She was holding it. We went and took it from her. That's one of the reasons she's angry with us. Because, Inarius was like, yeah, you take that toy from them. And then you're like, whoa, boy, that's not yours to take. And of course he ignored her. He ignored us. So we took it back from her after we found her, in her army practically decimated in hell, which by the way is really good for people's sanity to be stuck in hell.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of possibilities, but I don't know that we'll see it. I know there are chances.
So I hope that answers your question, at least somewhat. It's, again, raw speculation, and maybe we will see them, maybe we won't. But I do think that angels will probably be popping up sooner than later, or at least something will lead into them maybe a little bit more, because, again, it's such a core part of the Diablo identity, this eternal conflict that essentially is still going. I would be very surprised if we don't have something that leads into that. And maybe this item is something that specifically spoils that or hints to it. And if not, well, we'll see what tomorrow brings. I think that's going to do it for today, though, because we are definitely out of time. Again, friends, if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those in. You can send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for and any special pronunciation for your name. If you want to send us on Discord, we have the Patron Q and Podcast Questions channel for our Patreon subscribers, where we tend to look for first. And we also have one set aside for everybody else, which is the Q and Podcast Questions channel. And to be a reminder, we are here because of you and your support at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that we can continue to produce this podcast as well as our other podcasts. Your continued listening to our podcast on not just here, but also on places like Spotify also contributes to that. It allows us to thrive and potentially grow, which we hope that we can continue to do. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you get that benefit like early access to our podcast, which also means you get an ad-free version of the podcast available to you directly through Patreon. And if that seems like something you want, great. It also means that the site's going to be ad-free for you, and it gives you preference not just with us on the podcast for questions, but also on the queue. So hopefully we'll see you guys there, and we will definitely see you next week.